Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to the next in our series of the Transplant Talks. My name is Patty Draper, and I'm the director of the Transplant Mentors Program here at Gift of Life. I will be facilitating tonight's discussion and introducing our speakers in just a few minutes. First, we're just going to let everyone know that this is being recorded, and so we will have it for viewing online, and we will send all registered participants a copy in their email as well for future reference, or if you're not able to catch the whole thing. Also, we'll have the chat going, and I'll be keeping kind of half an eye on that while people are speaking. So if you have a question while one of our presenters are speaking, feel free to just go ahead and pop that question into the slides, okay? Or into the chat, excuse me. So first, I just want to make sure we introduce Gift of Life and tell a little bit about our history here. Gift of Life is a local nonprofit organization that promotes the support, awareness, and success of organ, eye, and tissue donation through education, mentoring, and collaboration with community partners, individuals, and people in the transplant community. Transplant Mentors is one of our two signature programs offered by the Gifts of Life organization, and that's the program that I have the pleasure of being the director of. It is offered nationwide and pairs trained mentors with transplant recipients and their care partners to provide insight, education, support, and encouragement through the transplant process. Tonight, we're going to be taking a look at the process of the donor family experience. I'm going to briefly introduce our speakers and then let them say hello. Our first speaker is Lisa Claudel Heidemann. She is a social worker. She is also an in-house hospital and family services coordinator at Midwest Transplant Network. She is assigned and housed at KU Medical Center. Lisa is a Kansas City native, a proud mother of two. She is a lover of live music, spending time with her family, and she is a lifelong dancer. A kind of a fun note is that Lisa was a dance student of one of our Gift of Life co-founders, Kim Harbor. So what is it, Tiny Toes or?
Tiny Tutus.
Tiny Tutus. So Kim still affectionately refers to Lisa as one of her tiny tutus, which I always think is really fun. So we will be using her as an expert in the really in the field of organ procurement and where that interfaces with the donor family. So we'll hear a lot from her this evening. Our other wonderful guest and speaker is Jeannie Terrell. She has a nursing background. Jeannie is retired since 2017, correct, Jeannie? Mm-hmm. From St. Luke's Hospital of Kansas City. She was, her last job as a nurse was as in the transplant program as a quality nurse specialist. So making sure everybody was doing their jobs and keeping everyone in line. Jeannie is a detail-oriented lady. She is a proud mother of two, grandmother to four. She is a donor mother and a donor grandmother. So she will be speaking to us from that perspective this evening. She lives in Smithville, Missouri with her lovely husband, Stephen. She spends a lot of her time volunteering now that she's retired. She likes to volunteer for the Kansas City Police Department. She did a Citizens Academy, which was pretty neat to hear about. She loves traveling with her girlfriends and sending her husband, Stephen, fishing. You want to say hello, Jeannie?
Hello. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. So first, we're going to go through some slides, and Lisa's going to do a little bit of background on, what an organ procurement organization does and what MTN does.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. My kind of life's work has become transplant and donation. And I first learned about being a registered organ donor when I was a tiny tutu. Well, I was a little older than a tiny tutu, but through Kim. So it really feels full circle to be doing this. So it's my honor to share about the work that we do. Midwest Transplant Network is one of 57 organ procurement organizations in the United States. And if you look at the slide here, our donor service area is the purple piece. We cover all of Kansas and the western 2/3 of Missouri. And we have a very robust program. I think in great part to, they say that nice people live in the Midwest, and I think it really shows 88% of our donor service area are registered organ donors. So that's those numbers are pretty powerful, and the national average is about 50%. So we're proud of that and the outreach that we're able to do, and to really partner with Gift of Life to do that. So our main focus really is working with donor families. Almost all of the families that we work with are families of deceased donors. We have a small I actually am the living donor coordinator for Anonymous Living Donors. So anyways, we take some of those calls, but yes, the three types of donors are, of course, living donation, and then tissue, a tissue donor and an organ donor. So both of those occur after somebody has passed away. Almost always it's untimely because families are never ready to lose their loved ones. But it really is the one good thing that we can offer to our donor families at the end of life. I've been working with donor families for almost 8 years, and it never doesn't give me chills when a family brings up donation on their worst day and asks if they can help somebody else. And so, and it happens a lot. It gives you a lot of faith of the good in the world on days that sometimes we really need it. So as you can see in the bottom in that purple line, our mission is to save lives by honoring the gift of organ and tissue donation with dignity and compassion. So I'm just proud to be here and to talk to you about this. I can't speak from a donor family perspective, but I certainly can speak to the work that I've done as I walked alongside all of the donor families that I have.
Certainly. And Lisa, that really just is such a true echo of the Transplant Mentors Program, that transplant professionals, we really cannot, my history as a transplant professional and yours as well. And Jeannie, we know what it is to be alongside people when they receive their transplant, but to experience it is a very individualized process, and it really just can't be compared. So to have someone that can answer to what it is to experience the other side is really so important. I guess I'm curious, when we're looking at this slide, what do you think the makeup is regionally of organ transplants that happen? Do you think, are they mostly deceased donors, living donors, tissue donors? What do you see the most of?
Well, so to give you an idea, any death that happens in a hospital, in any hospital, but, speaking specifically to our donor service area, but anytime somebody has a cardiac time of death in a hospital, those referrals are called in to Midwest Transplant Network to be screened for tissue donation. Some of our tiniest donors, like little Jonathan, that Jeannie's gonna talk about, some of our tiniest donors can donate their heart for valves all the way up into the 80s. And I have a slide that I'm gonna share with you, but yes, so transplantable tissues, but so there's a whole age range. It's pretty broad. The transplant organizations that we work with, the tissue transplant organizations that we work with, those numbers really ebb and flow. And the numbers I'm referring to are age and to our tiniest donor's weight. But one tissue donor can help over 100 people. And so any kind of tissue I'm speaking to, and you see this strong, healthy football player here, but a lot of our tissues can go to help orthopedic injuries. Of course, eyes can give the gift of sight through the cornea, which is the lens on top of the eye, and the sclera. The heart for valves, like I mentioned, our tiniest donors can be heart valve donors. Dermis or skin graft can help folks who have been burn victims, or it's pretty rare that somebody doesn't know somebody who's been affected by breast cancer. Can assist women with reconstructive surgeries, but mobility, musculoskeletal, so different, like I mentioned, different orthopedic injuries or sports injuries, folks can be helped. And so it's really, I feel like I do a lot of the education that I do is focused on organ donation specifically. And I feel like that's what's discussed, in the media and things like that. But tissue donors are changing lives every single day. And the cool thing about tissue donation is that, some of those tissues can be saved for up to 5 years, and they can help folks throughout all of that time while they're waiting for the perfect match, just like we do with organ donation.
That's really incredible. I had no idea that they could be saved for that long for when someone comes about and needs it. That's so wonderful.
Yeah, it depends on what kind of tissue it is, but yeah, it is. It's pretty fascinating stuff.
Great. Well,
Yeah.
you mentioned a few times the idea of our tiniest donors. And so that kind of brings us to the story of Jonathan Wilkins. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him, and then we'll let Jeannie chat. His mom, Katie, you can see her in the lower left-hand picture, snuggling with cute little Jonathan. She had an ultrasound about midway through her pregnancy, and it was revealed that Jonathan would be born with a very severe kidney disease. They carried on with the pregnancy, hoping that he would be healthy enough when he was born, that this would be something that they could take on as a family. But when he was born, he was found to have very progressed disease. He died about 4 days after he was born, and he was able to donate his heart valves. Jonathan was a little brother when he was born. His parents, Katie and Spencer, had their older son, Jax, and he's now an older brother to Sam, who is a little wild one, and their youngest, Malia, who is just the sweetest. Jeannie, I wonder if there's anything. Well, and first, let me clarify, Jeannie, you're Jonathan's grandma, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what's your relation to his parents?
So Katie's my daughter. After she found out that he had problems with his kidneys, I went to every ultrasound every week with her until he was born. I was there when he was born, and he did urinate when he was born. We were happy to see that, but his kidney worked. So.
Okay. And then can you tell me a little bit about the conversation between Katie and Spencer, Jonathan's dad, and yourself, and your whole family, just about the idea of donation, and when did that become something you were thinking about as a family?
Lisa, I don't know. We talked to Lisa about it quite a bit. There was always hope that he would be okay, but we did talk about it. And that because of my working in transplant, I worked in the OR for 30 years and did a lot of transplants there too. So it was very important to me, and it was important to them. We talked to Lisa, and Lisa told us what to do and how to do it. And Katie and Spencer talked to the hospital about it before Jonathan passed away. And so that was something that was very important to them. And actually, when he died, I called Lisa, and she said the call was in, and that it was they were working on the things that needed to be done, which I left after that. But which was hard to take. They were getting ready to take him home on hospice, and he died before that, and it was hard for them to hand him over to somebody to get his valves. And Absolutely. We did, back to what Lisa said, we found out that one of his valves was used 2 years after he donated. It went someplace in Florida.
Have you guys been in touch with his recipient family at all?
Lisa, they said that with tissue, it's too hard to track all that. So we don't know exactly what happened with all that.
It's so nice to know, though, that it was used. I remember you saying that, that was important to know.
Yes, it was. And we did some investigating because of my relationship with MTN, but and they were always very helpful and hadn't been used yet. And Katie and Spencer were very, very excited when they found out that it had been used.
Wonderful. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to share about Jonathan while we're talking about him?
Well, I will say that his Jonathan would be 7 now. Sam and Malia, 5 and 3, they talk about him probably every day. So we keep him and my daughter, who also was a donor, we keep them in our conversations every day. So
I think that's so important and so lovely for your family, that such a wonderful example to the kids and to everyone around you, that when tragedy happens, you can really sometimes make some good outcome out of that. And such a good example of that.
and it's
And I
something to
really
hold on
appreciate.
to. It's very important. It's something to hold on to. You know that they did something, so that makes it not quite as senseless.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you sharing about him, and we'll talk a little bit more about Ashley in a bit. Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about just the overwhelming need for organs we have here, not just in the Midwest, but, nationwide?
Yeah, I believe there's about 114,000 folks who are waiting for a life-saving transplant. And I just think this slide is really staggering. Every 9 minutes, someone is added to the wait list. And 17 people die each day waiting for a transplant. And so, I worked with transplant patients for about 5 years before I worked with donor families. And I think there's always, it's interesting to watch a recipient kind of come to terms with, that they're going to be receiving oftentimes a deceased organ to save their life. And, what I always told them, and what I talk to my donor families about is, somebody is just praying for a yes, somebody say yes to help them. And so I just think that speaks to the heart of the donor family. And also, I think it's really important for anybody that's listed for a transplant. They are the hope. They are the hope for our donor families. And so they're the living, breathing, get extra time with their loved ones, literally walking around hope for our donor families. And so that's really powerful to remember. I always like to remind recipients of that. They're the hope. So
yes, it's a very special connection.
yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, since we are based in the Kansas City area, and that's where you work, is in the Kansas City region, as we saw the map, pretty much all of Kansas and the better part of Missouri. How does the Midwest compare in terms of other parts of the country, in terms of donation and the need for organs?
So I would have to I could pull out some, SRTR data and things like that nationally, but I'm just really proud to say that our organization, Midwest Transplant Network, is one of the highest performing OPOs in the nation. And so we are, I don't know we are an aggressive center. We're always looking for ways to help families who want to, they need the hope too at the end of their life, and they want to help other people. So we're always looking for new ways to do that. We're also always looking for ways to kind of chip away at that very big list. So the Midwest, our OPO, I'm proud to say, is a high performing one. So
yes, and we're so lucky to have you. I'm curious if you want to talk a little bit about, when you do approach a family for a solid organ donation, how does, what organs are donated, and how far these organs can go.
Okay. So when I sit down and I talk to a donor family, it's after either they've made a decision to move to comfort care, and they know their loved one's not going to recover. And we think high performing need, that's a good question, Kim. So I'm going to come back to that. But so either a family's made a decision to move to comfort care and we think that their loved one is eligible for donation after your heart stops, or some neurological testing has been completed and their loved one has been given, it's discovered that they have a time of death. And so I should have switched those slides around, but those are the two ways that I kind of come to meet with a family. Or just like Jamie's family, they have asked if their loved one can be a donor because they know they're not going to make it. And so if you kind of go back to that other slide there, when I usually sit down with a family, oftentimes almost the first thing that they ask me is if they would get to meet the people that they would be able to help. Oftentimes the heart is a really important organ to be transplanted, because we think of the heart as kind of what makes a person, I feel like a lot of my donor families relate to that, but it's pretty powerful to watch a room of donor family members and getting to tell them that their loved one could save up to 8 lives. Lungs can be separated. Kidneys, of course, we only need 1 kidney unless we have a little tiny donor. Sometimes both of their kidneys can go in to help one adult. But we just kind of talk through these things and what may have led, oftentimes there's a lot of questions from a donor families, like what may have led a recipient to be on the list, kidneys, hypertension and diabetes. So just different things like that, or it's just really an opportunity for us to educate and for donor families to ask absolutely any question that they want to. And our organs, so one donor hero can save up to 8 lives, and they can help folks all over the country. There's different times that organs can be cold before they're placed back in a warm body. And so that comes into play, but a donor family can help from all over the country. And it's pretty powerful to be able to share with them. We are able to tell them some recipient information leading up to their donor surgery and then following their donor surgery. And we're able to tell them what part of the country their recipient lives in, how old they are, and whether they're male or female. And then we have a pretty amazing letter that we send out within about a month of their donation to tell them a little bit more about their loved ones. It's all information that we're able to gather from the transplant centers.
Yeah. Do you want to, there was a question in the chat for you kind of asking
Yes.
what it means when you say that your organization that covers Kansas and the better part of Missouri, what does it mean when you say that you're a high performing OPO?
So there's a couple different ways that our governing bodies take a look at that, but it's really number of organ donors per, and I may not be saying this exactly correctly, but I know it's in relation to the number of organ donors we have compared to the population. And of course, the number of organ donor potential that we have. So it's a really rare opportunity actually to be an organ or tissue donor. And so they take a look at that number and they compare that to the number of donors that we are able to move forward with, and they're able to donate organs and tissues. So those are probably a broad answer there, but yeah.
I think it's
Thank you, Kim.
interesting.
Good question.
when you talk about, the idea that it's very difficult almost to be a donor. You have to die in a very specific way and inside of a hospital to be able to be a donor. We used to have people would remark all the time, why does it take so long and why are more organs not being donated? And I think it's interesting to speak on, it's not for lack of trying, it's because it's a very precise process.
Yes, it is. And my, excuse me, my puppy's getting wild over there, but no, it is a very specific process. And, it's pretty, it's been very interesting to look at over, the 8 years that I've been on the donation side. And for a donor after cardiac death, that age has raised from 60 to 65. I wonder if we'll see that go higher. We evaluate donors who it's been discovered that they are brain dead. We evaluate those donors up to age 85. And so I think folks are sometimes surprised that their loved one might be able to be a donor. There's so many things that I think people think rule them out to be donors, but they don't. And science is a beautiful thing, and all kinds of things are happening. Even in the time of COVID, we've learned that we have had COVID positive donors with very successful outcomes and without transmission rates. So lots of positive things happening there. Yeah.
It's exciting to be on, I think too, in healthcare, when you are meeting something that is the end of a life, to be also butting up against something which is, the extending and improving of a life. It's a very special thing.
It is.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, you said a little bit about how someone's identified as a donor. Then what's the role of the organ procurement organization? What does that process look like?
Yeah. So we, of course, do a ton of collaboration with our hospital partners. Me in particular, I'm lucky enough to get to work with all the folks over at KU. And, what we try to do, we don't get involved with the family until they're ready to make a decision. Or, like I mentioned, if there's that brain death testing that is completed and pronouncement happens. And, the most important thing for a family is to understand that everything has been done to save their loved one. And so when we sit down with them, we want to make sure that all of their questions are answered. There's no stone left unturned about the care that they've received, and really those questions that they want to make sure that we want our donor families to be able to answer. And then we can sit down with them and just have a conversation, see what we can help with. We are all in helping professions, social workers, nurses, chaplains. And so our goal is to support a family however feels best to them. And so we really just sit down and have a conversation with them, and try to do as much education as we can and kind of explain what our process looks like.
And then I know, it's I would think pretty well assumed that the health of the potential donor is very well investigated. Could you talk a little bit about that? And then also kind of some of the information you gather to make sure that, that you're not putting the recipient at risk.
Yeah, of course. So we do, whenever we get in front of a family, to approach them and offer donation or let them know that their loved one has made that decision. We have done a full, almost always, unless there's a case where things are happening quicker than they would typically, but our process includes a full medical evaluation prior to meeting with a family. And then of course, if we do move forward and their loved one's going to be a donor, an even more involved process. But we really don't want to offer donation as an option to a family unless we know that at the point we've come to, there's nothing that we see that would rule them out as an organ donor. Part of our informed disclosure that we sit down and we share with our families too, is that at any point in our testing process, if we come to a point where we think that they can't, aren't going to be able to find their perfect match, then we sit them down and we tell that to them. And what was the second part of your question? You just asked me. I know. You were talking about our evaluation process. So This is really important to donor families too, because whatever their loved one has going on, we get lots of questions. We don't we don't want anybody else to endure any further suffering because of an illness or an infection that our loved one might have. And so one of the first things that we do is we draw several tubes of blood, and we send that all for serology testing, which we look to get back their blood typing. We check for all kinds of infections and things like that. Families are often surprised, hepatitis, HIV, COVID, drug and alcohol abuse. None of those things are rule outs for donation. And like I said, we really usually have a pretty encompassed view of a health history before we offer donation to a family. But we have a full evaluation, and always our goal to ensure that our recipients would be safe and healthy.
I think it's so interesting to note that, people can have a lot of disease processes, like you mentioned, hepatitis, HIV, et cetera, that you would maybe previously think would rule out your family member or yourself from donating, when in fact you can still donate your organs without any, without a huge degree of concern of transmission, which is really exciting.
Yeah. And it's pretty powerful to be able to have a family say, oh gosh, you need to know my loved one has hepatitis, or something going on, and we're able to share with them. They might be able to help somebody else who has hepatitis. It's really powerful to be able to share that with the donor family.
We did have a question in the chat about which states, or even how many states, are helped by the MTN donations.
I mean, potentially, I saw that. It's a good question. I mean, really, all over the United States. I mean, I've even seen some of our donor heroes have helped folks, on the coasts. It all depends on acceptance of the transplant center, how the recipient is doing. It also depends on the list, and a whole host of things that once we put all of the donor information into, then it goes to finding their perfect match. So
it all goes in that very complex database.
Yes. Yes.
I wonder, something we see on social media a lot, and I think a lot of people's greatest reference for organ donors is this idea of an honor walk. We're seeing more and more of that, and I'm curious if you can kind of speak to where in the process that happens, and how the family participates in that, and how you get all those people to participate.
Yeah. Well, every hospital has a little bit different process. I can certainly tell you exactly how our process at KU works, but usually after we sit down and go over the process with the family, either a family will ask about those beautiful honor walks that they've seen online, or it's something that we're able to offer in conjunction with the hospital to see if the family wants to do something like that. Whether they're able to participate in person. Typically there's an opportunity if we're on site. MTN's always on site until a donor goes to the OR and during the OR, but prior to transferring the patient, a lot of times we're able to have a moment of silence. Sometimes the family likes to have a chaplain come, but we're kind of able to gather in the donor's room, and the honor walk happens right about the time that the donor's supposed to be down in the OR. And the patient rolls out. There is nothing like rolling out of a donor's room with their family around you, and them getting to see the halls lined with these amazing hospital staff from all over the hospital that have shown up to honor their donor. And the way that is, we have a communication system at KU, but the charge nurse notifies that system once we come up with the time. MTN has the OR time, and then that communication is sent out to everybody in the hospital. And so there's really just nothing like it. And Yeah,
Very
it's
special.
it is. And we're able to even do every once in a while, we'll have a family that for whatever reason needs to leave the hospital and can't be there. And we will videotape those and do whatever we can to make them feel a part of that honor walk so they can see those folks that have showed up for their donor hero.
And I will say, for the hospital employees, when I was at St. Luke's for 8 years and was part of many honor walks, and mostly we were at the very end, near the OR entrance, and it is a very powerful experience and something that I think is a nice refresher for everyone that works at the hospital too, to remember really just how powerful the gift of donation is, and just what that family is doing, and to thank them and to recognize that process. Jeannie, was that something that you experienced with Ashley?
No, they didn't have that then. It's been 4 years, but
Sure.
the respiratory therapist, when she left the OR, we were able to go into the OR. She was very emotional, and it made me feel bad for her, but and the staff, when we left the room, they were very emotional too.
Sure. Well, I'd like to take a minute just to talk with Jeannie about her beautiful daughter, Ashley. Ashley died in 2018, and we'll talk a little about her. She was a very spirited young lady who loved to be creative and in nature. She was very talented artist. She loved music, singing, painting, and drawing. As you can see, she was a beautiful young lady in these pictures. She really was a nurturer. She loved animals of all sorts, and especially children. She loved being with her nephews, Jax and Sam. And then Ashley, when she was 36, was in the hospital undergoing some routine medical testing. And she had a witness respiratory arrest, which means she stopped breathing. And as a result of that, her heart stopped beating. And she, doctors and nurses, they did what they could to perform life-saving measures. CPR was administered, and she had was intubated, and they did further testing. But unfortunately, her brain was without adequate oxygen for too long. After 3 days of extensive testing, and she transferred from one hospital to another to get a second opinion to make sure everything was done. They were told that she would not have a meaningful recovery. And Ashley was a self-designated donor on her driver's license. Uh, Jeannie, is there anything you want to share with us about this experience with Ashley? Kind of a little bit about what Lisa's been discussing?
Um, yeah, we were at the hospital Patricia used to work at when this happened. Um, and it was a small hospital, and they didn't have a neurologist on staff. They didn't have any of the uh, things we thought were important. So
It
I
was
called.
a small community hospital in the St. Louis area,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
I called Lisa, and she contacted MTN, and they helped me a lot because it was Mid-America transplant area there. And they helped me get her transferred to another hospital. They said, if she's brain dead, another hospital's not going to take her, but she had not been declared brain dead. So we went to, which hospital will we get?
Barnes Jewish
Barnes,
Hospital in St.
yes,
Louis.
huge hospital. Everybody there was very nice. She had all sorts of testing, and we thought she would be be able to donate all of her organs, but she had one. If they would touch her eye with a Q-tip, she just had one tiny. I couldn't even see it, so she was unable to. She was considered not completely brain dead, so she was only able to donate her liver and her kidneys, which was wonderful, but I was hoping she could donate more than that.
Sure.
We were able to go into my daughter Katie and I. My husband didn't handle it very well, so my daughter Katie and I were able to go into the operating room with her. They extubated her. She never took another breath, and that was a very special experience.
It's
You want me
so
to talk
nice that you were able to be with her. That's not
Yes.
always the experience of the donor family.
Yes, it was very, very incredible.
Good.
And again, we were in St. Louis, so it was it was a long week for us. But
Yes.
do you want me to talk about the donors
Yeah,
now?
well, I was going to ask Lisa a
I mean,
quick
the
question.
recipients?
You brought up something interesting, Jeannie, just the idea of you know, you were hoping she could donate more, but because she wasn't considered brain dead, they were only able to use the kidneys and the liver. So I wondered if Lisa, you could take a moment and explain sort of the difference between what can be donated from a brain dead donor and what can be donated from a donor after cardiac death.
Yeah. Ooh, well, first of all, I just think, and it is a long, hard process. It's hard to be a donor family. And donation can be a roller coaster of a ride, but it's the commitment of the donor families to work through all of that. So and things are always changing. But when a patient is declared, when we discover, when the hospital discovers that a patient is brain dead, it's they go to the operating room still intubated and still with those machines pumping the blood through their bodies. And so that is why essentially they're able to help more folks. And we can look at evaluating all of the organs that can be donated. And for donation after cardiac death or circulatory death, transplant centers have pretty strong requirements. Of course, it depends on the transplant center, but the patient has to pass away within different amounts of times. Like for kidneys, our extubation period is at this point is 2 hours or 120 minutes. So if you're going to be an organ donor, after extubation, after your heart stops, that process, your heart has to stop within 2 hours. And so in the case of Ashley, I know, Jean, you said she passed really quickly. And so she was able to be a kidney donor and a liver donor. One of the reasons that you were able to recover kidneys after that period of time is because of pumps, kidney pumps. And there's lots of things happening. Lungs, there are centers that are using lung pumps. I mean, there's just all kinds of really interesting things that are happening. But you really have to pass away within that shorter period of time in order to help more folks as an organ donor. But we can almost always recover kidneys if we can allocate lungs, based on a whole host of things. They can go up to 2 hours, but with a heart and liver, the heart has to stop pretty quickly after extubation. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Or
I think so. And then Jeannie, I guess I'm just wondering, Ashley, she chose to be a donor on her driver's license. Did you know that about her prior to all of this?
We had discussed it. Yes, I assumed that she was. And back when I first started in transplant, it didn't make any difference if you had decided that you wanted to be a donor on your driver's license. It was still the family's choice.
Sure.
So when Ashley passed away, it was because, I mean, it certainly was our choice also, but it was because she had made the choice, it was going to happen.
Do you think that made that easier for you, knowing that it was her decision also?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was. I mean, she would have I know she would have wanted that even if she hadn't done that. She always wanted to help people. So,
I was going to say she was a helper by nature.
yes.
Well,
You want
let's
me
talk about how she really impacted some people's lives. Ashley was able to donate her liver to a 55-year-old woman who was the sole caregiver for her mother and 3 grandchildren. So really extended the life of a very busy lady. One of her kidneys were to an exact match to a 66-year-old in California. and her other kidney went to an adult in the St. Louis area. Now, the finding the exact match, that's a pretty exciting thing. I wonder if Jeannie, you're with your transplant nursing background. What did you think of that? The exact match?
I thought it was incredible. I was hoping it would be more local when it went to
Yeah.
California. I thought, well, okay. I've never heard from either of her kidney recipients. I have heard from the liver recipient. She's sent me a picture of her and her family, that was very touching. I write them every year, and Lisa helped me with that. I was very frustrated having to write, never hearing anything. I was frustrated, and Lisa said, "Just say I wonder how I wonder how you're doing."
Yeah.
And I do that every year. And the liver donor has, I haven't heard from her for a while, but she's always contacted me through mail and sent me pictures and told me about her family.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Liver recipient, I'm sorry. So, yes.
And so you write to all three of them annually?
Yes.
Okay.
Usually on her birthday and
On Ashley's birthday.
on Ashley's birthday. And actually, when we chose how we chose when to stop treatment with her, it just happened. She died it would have been Jonathan's third or fourth birthday. So that's the day we chose. It was February 23rd. That was his birthday. And we said, this has some meaning. This is time to be, it's hard to know, when do you stop? That was difficult. When do you say, we're done?
So that's a very special way they'll always be together. That's a very nice way to think of it.
Yes.
Lisa, I wanted to give you an opportunity to address some of these myths that you were wanting to chat about.
Yeah. Well, some of the things that when we sit down and talk to families, they have all these questions, a lot of questions that they haven't felt like they've been able to ask, until they've kind of turned a corner and understand that things, their loved one might not be going home with them. And so a lot of times autopsies are a concern. In every situation that we have, every donor that we have, we evaluate whether or not the medical examiner needs to be called. We work really closely with them. So an autopsy and organ donation can absolutely happen. We work very parallel processes to ensure that both of those things can happen. Donation is not a rule out for an open casket funeral, for tissue or for organ donation. There is no cost to families who want to have their loved one be an organ or a tissue donor. It truly is a gift. And so, like I said, there's no cost to the families. And then medical suitability, I addressed that already a little bit, but a lot of folks just think that their loved one couldn't help somebody else, and they're surprised when they can. And so we really do take a really close look at evaluation of our donors. And then religion, there is no, every once in a while, of course, there's different sects of religions that believe differently, but there's no religion on paper per se, for lack of a better term, that says that organ donation shouldn't happen or isn't a good thing. Every once in a while, we of course meet with a family that they don't feel like it aligns with their beliefs, but there's no religion that says, organ donation is a bad thing. So I think all of those things are really important. And even when I meet with big groups of nurses and medical folks, they bring up these questions. So I think they're really powerful to kind of clear up.
Absolutely, because I think if those are the things standing in between you and donating, it's important to know the absolute truth, which is, not be walking around thinking something inaccurate.
Yeah.
You had said a little bit about, the financial bit.
Yeah. So any of the life-saving efforts leading up to organ donation, that's the family's fiscal responsibility. But there's also, I love to remind folks that there are people who specialize in billing and different things like that at the hospital that you're always going to have access to, because those bills can be really stressful. Okay. But so at the time that we sit down and we meet with a family, anything moving forward, after we have authorization, is billed, to Midwest Transplant Network. We are a non-for-profit organization, but the easiest way to explain, because I'm sure some folks will wonder, but the easiest way to explain how the donor charges are covered is that the recipient's insurance pays for that. So, but it's no responsibility of the family. We have a charge process that we go through that's different with each hospital to ensure that a family won't be billed if they would receive something they have a question about. We have good partnerships with all of our hospitals that we're able to work through that.
Wonderful. And then, of course, any burial or funeral expenses are the responsibility of the family.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, that is a question that we get from time to time. And it's not, it would be a complete conflict of interest if we paid for those services. But oftentimes between the hospital social workers and ourselves, there's some different programs that we can refer families on to for assistance with that.
Wonderful. So one of the things I'm always really enthusiastic to see are just the continued support for the donor families and how enthusiastic the donor families are about participating in these events that you guys have.
Yeah.
Gift of Life will be, we'll be walking with you in a couple weeks. We're very excited. We have a pretty robust team. So if anyone wants to join, I'll make sure I send the registration information along when this presentation is over. We really are excited.
Good. Yeah, I love to share this not only with our donor families, but also the nurses that care for and love these patients and families. On their darkest day, we walk this hallowed ground with these donor families. And these events, our relationship carries on much longer than just going to surgery. And I think that's really important to highlight. We have our celebration of heroes that we have once a year, which is a little bit more of a somber ceremony, but it's a beautiful ceremony. We have a sand ceremony that's involved in that, and typically a balloon release, but you'll see there's different activities on here. We always have a Hope for the Holidays activity that happens in December, and our big, beautiful legacy walk. It's just really nice for families to be able to look to the family next to them, and maybe they've been through something similar, but there's no more pride than watching a donor family with their t-shirt, with their loved one's name on the back, or we have a tribute trail that's really special, that our donors, donor families are able to highlight their donors. So it's a relationship with whatever the donor family wants it to be. I text message with some of my donor families. They reach out when they have a question. They reach out when they want to know how the recipients are doing. And so, and the quilt, I can't not talk about the quilts. You'll see on the left-hand side there with the Midwest Transplant Network emblem in the middle. But all of our events, families have the opportunity to gather the different items that they want to use to make a quilt square. And then we have our quilts that are put together, and they're forever. As long as there is, a donor hero, those quilts will be well loved and taken care of. So we continue to share those donor hero stories.
Great. I want to make sure that we're going to kind of skip ahead just because I want to make sure we address something that we had a lot of questions about in the beginning. Well, first I want to say, I love this picture of Jonathan, Katie, and Spencer, and then Silly Jax from the calendar. MTN puts out a beautiful calendar every year featuring the previous year's donor family. So that's always really special. Something that a lot of people had questions about in the registration was the idea of communicating with your donor family. So I've put some information here on the slide for people to review, And Jeannie, you kind of touched on this too. You've reached out and maybe felt a little frustrated that you didn't hear back. And we had a lot of people comment, well, I've reached out to my donor family and I've not heard anything. So Lisa, I wanted you to kind of spearhead this and kind of help us understand, what may be connected to that lack of communication.
Yeah. I mentioned when I first started talking that anytime there's a donor, it's an untimely death. Oftentimes because of a tragedy that's occurred. It's always a tragic situation when somebody's losing their loved one. But I think, if you've ever lost anybody and somebody else in your family handled it differently than you did, I think it's a good reminder. People grieve differently. Sometimes they have no idea what to say. If you've written, we have a couple of brochures that actually we feel like helps a little bit. It's literally just like a thinking of you card, and you can sign your name, and maybe that will start some communication. All of that is monitored initially through MTN, just for privacy's sake. And then a donor and a recipient can kind of decide if they've both signed a release, if they want to communicate. But when families ask me, I'm just real honest. One of that first questions I mentioned earlier that they ask is, will I get to meet the person that I'm going to be able to help? And my honest answer is, I don't know. Oftentimes that can happen, but oftentimes it won't. And I just think you're dealing with grieving folks and they don't know what to say. And they could just be struggling. And so I think, my colleague Denise that recently retired, the one really great thing is that those letters that are sent, if they're ever misplaced or communication information is misplaced, those letters are always kept at Midwest Transplant Network. And so if anybody ever has a question about it or decides that they want to write, there's always the opportunity to do that. But I just think the short answer is, Patty, is that folks grieve really differently and it's hard to respond to those letters.
Yeah, I would always remind patients that the transplant center will work as your post office, and
Yep.
they will screen the letters and make sure there's nothing that shouldn't be included. We talked a little bit in this slide about you don't want anything Googleable, essentially. You don't want the person to be able to Google you and find you and approach you in a way that you may not be prepared for.
Yeah.
So to keep the privacy is important, number one. And number two, to know that there's grief and loss and a lot of emotion on both sides. So to remember that whether you're the recipient family, or the donor family, people are just processing this gigantic thing in their own way. But the letters, like you said, will always be there. If you feel compelled to write, I feel that that is almost as important a therapeutic process, whether anyone ever sees the letter or not.
Yeah.
There is something in putting pen to paper that is therapeutic. And, I wonder, Jeannie, if that's part of the reason why you continue to write every year.
Probably to honor her and to just makes me think of her, and hopefully these people are doing well, and it is an honor to have a family member who is a donor. I've had friends who've lost children in other ways, and I feel very blessed that we have this memory of her and she lives on.
That's a really wonderful way to say that, Jeannie. And I think that it should be acknowledged that donor families really are heroes and saving lives. And I know you don't like to receive a lot of praise, but I hope that you hear that and just stick it in your back pocket for when you're having a bad day, that you and your family are incredible and you should be very proud of all of the gifts that you have given, and that you are such a good advocate also for organ donation, that is something to be proud of. And I think it's nice, you and your family, you all participate in the walk. So maybe if people come and they participate with our walk team, you guys can go ahead and meet these lovely ladies in person. So I'm going to kind of show some ways that people can stay connected to Midwest Transplant Network find you on all the socials. It's really fun to follow them. You can see their fancy new jet and all the cool technology that they engage in. So I just want to take a moment to say thank you so much to Jeannie and Lisa. The information you've shared is certainly invaluable, and I can't wait to distribute this so more people can hear what you've had to say. Anything you want to share before we go?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Thank
participating.
you. Thanks for having us.
To all of our attendees, our next talk will be focused on the idea of the big ask and the big, well, no, it's going to be on communication. We're saving the one that I think is going to be really special for our last quarter of the year, which is going to be how to approach the topic of living donation, and then how people have experienced living donation as well. So if you have any questions or follow-up suggestions or topics, please feel free to reach out. I love getting ideas from our community of participants. And again, thank you so much for attending, and try to enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you.